We all ready? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, firstly, can I thank you very much for coming along this afternoon for this press conference, because we've got some very important things to say. But before we go into what those are, I just want to thank you also for respecting the embargo. I just want to introduce the panel and then also explain very quickly, just reiterate a couple of things how today will work. I'd like to thank, firstly, some colleagues from other agencies. On my left is Laura Johnson. I know you've had the formal introductions, but I'd like to do that well. And on my right is Andrew Mason, from the chairman of the Telford and Wrekin Safeguarding Board. But of course, I particularly want to thank Stephen, Annette and Jay Dean for joining us today, because what I want to say will not be as powerful if they weren't here. And I know they've got some very, very powerful things to say to you today. When I've finished opening and saying a few things, there will be a session for questions, which is about half an hour. Hopefully we'll be able to get through some very important questions then, but we also recognise you'll want to do one-to-ones. We've set aside a big proportion of the afternoon, so if we don't exhaust all your questions in that first half an hour period, I hope you won't become frustrated, because clearly we want to make sure that in those one-to-ones you do have plenty of time to do those things. In one sense, we're here today for one simple reason, because Jamie Reynolds killed Georgia. In one sense, it is as simple as that. But of course, it is not that simple. It's never that simple. And what we discovered very, very quickly after discovering Georgia's death is that we, the police, initially, and latterly other agencies, had dealings with Reynolds. And there were very quickly questions, certainly in my mind as Chief Constable, as to whether we had done everything that we could and should have done in those initial incidents. As a result of that, I referred that matter to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, seeking an independent investigation. Their judgment was that my force was more than capable of investigating ourselves, but I was very aware that there were critical issues to be looked at, and I was also aware as well, and very unusually to be sitting here alongside a colleague, because Steve and Annette are parents first of all, but Steve is also a police officer. And I just felt it was absolutely critical that we brought that external scrutiny that my own force, try as it might, just would not be able to do. And certainly I didn't think it could convince the public. And probably much more importantly, I don't think I could convince Steve and Annette of that degree of independence that they obviously desired. I was therefore able to go to another force, and Devon Cornwall investigated the police's handling of that matter, and they've conducted a very thorough, very searching and comprehensive investigation into how we looked at matters preceding Georgia's death. Of course, that review, that investigation, only really looked at the police aspects of the matter. And the reason we're here today is because at the same time, other agencies, together with the police, decided it was absolutely critical that there was a serious case review into the events that preceded Georgia's murder. And that's why I'm sitting here today with colleagues from other agencies, because it was critical that we looked at everything that we needed to jointly. And the report that you had overnight and features in these papers is that report. And that's what we're here mainly to reflect on today. Just some things I want to share with you, because I don't intend at this point to go through recommendations and line by line of the report. I don't think our time is best served there, and hopefully you'll address anything that you want to in questions, but some personal and professional views. We could and should have done better. It is as simple as that. We could and should have done better. We let Georgia down, we let Steve and Annette down, we let Jay Dean down, and as you'll see in the report, there's some other young people referred to, and we let them down as well. It's as simple as that. We have a right, the public have a right, their officers come to work and they ask themselves searching questions about what's in front of them, about joining the dots, about making sure we speak to all the agencies that we need to, be searching and be professionally curious about what's before them. And that's difficult. We put the men and women in our force and every other police force through some really testing things. They are often given not enough information. They're often asked to make decisions very, very quickly, when in a perfect world they'd have more time and more resources at hand. But we do have a right, in spite of those challenges, to ask that they do the very best they can. And that's what this report is about. Yes, of course, it looks backwards, as it must do, because if we don't understand the history as to how we got here, it is simply impossible that we go forward. And what that report reflects is a whole series of things that the police and other agencies represented here can do to improve and make sure the failings and the ways that we let people down previously do not happen again. I, of course, cannot say that it will never happen again, because there are, ladies and gentlemen, some bad and dangerous people out there who will be doing their best to hurt vulnerable people. But in our battle to make sure they don't do that and we reduce the chances to an absolute minimum, we're doing everything we can to make sure that we've improved across a whole range of things. And I think the word unique is used too often today, but I do think it's unique that I'm sitting here alongside Georgia's family. And not all the messages that I know they want to share with you will be necessarily comfortable for me to hear. But we have one aim today, which is A, to expose what Reynolds did. Secondly, to make absolutely sure that we as agencies are improving and doing everything that we promised George and Annette and Jadine that we would do. And to make sure that we really mean it. And also to say to the public, we need you to help us combat these terrible types of crime. And for me to say to the colleagues that I have the privilege of working with, we have to do our absolute best every single day. Just a couple of things before I close. For me, speaking personally for a moment, I've been a proud police officer for over 36 years, and I've been part of a fantastic force, West Mercia, for over 8 years. This probably ranks amongst the top 2 or 3 things I've ever had to deal with in terms of tragedy, impact upon the community, but of course upon the family and friends of Georgia. It makes it no more or less of a tragedy because Georgia was the daughter of a police officer, but of course it did make it much more raw and still has done and will do for everybody that know and love Steve and Lynette and Georgia. It doesn't mean as Chief Constable I try any harder or less hard because Steve is a colleague of mine, but believe me, it does make me think very, very long and hard about what we could, what we should have done, and what we will do in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, that really is it from me at the moment. It was deliberately short because I appreciate that you've had a chance to read the report and there's things you want to ask me. But can I just stress, it's important that I'm held to account for what my force has done. It's an extraordinary privilege to lead the men and women in West Mercia, and Steve is one of those. But when things do go wrong, as they do, it's important that someone like me sits up and takes the questions from you on behalf of the public that we serve. Thank you very much indeed. When you've got a question, could I just ask that you just say your first name and where you're from, just so at least we know who you are. That would be very helpful. And before we go to questions, ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else you want to say at this point?
No.
Okay, thank you very much. Who'd like to go first? Gosh, this is a first, a reticent press pack. I'll take this lady and that lady, is that okay?
I'm Sophie Madman from the Shropshire Star.
Hello, Sophie.
I just wanted to ask whether you all feel that the report so far has been thorough enough in the way that it's gone into what happened and the measures that it's taken in the future.
Perhaps we could ask Stephen and Annette and Jadine, because in one sense they're probably as important a judge of this as we are professionally, maybe.
Yeah. The report is very thorough. It was an eye-opener for myself and Steve when we were given all the information back in 2013. We were given that information because we were going to trial for Reynolds, and we needed to know the background about what he had previously done. Obviously, it wasn't good listening for myself and for Stephen. In fact, it was quite distressing because even myself as a non-police person could pick up that actually things hadn't been done correctly. So that was bad. What was good is that all the agencies have come together and they all have shown that they understood that they'd failed us and desperately failed Georgia, and then they have commissioned this report to be done. So there's lots of findings in it. They are dealing with lots of issues, and I know they're working together better as agencies within Telford and Wrekin. So that's one good outcome from it.
Laura or Andrew, do you want to say anything?
Well, I'd be happy to say that I think it is a good report, but we do look as well for even deeper learning if we can get it. And what we've asked the Safeguarding Board to do here in Telford, and they have done that, is commission a second phase of learning. That's not ready yet, it's not complete. But again, we'll be going into maybe more technical issues around the children's services part of this as well, and how practitioners have worked on the front line. So there will be some more learning, but this is the main learning without a doubt. It will be more technical learning we're looking for as well.
Speaking for the police, I think it's a very good report. It doesn't shirk any of the issues. It's gone into incredible depth. It's certainly not easy reading for me as a police officer or for my force, but that's not what this is about. This is about making absolutely sure we do the best we can in the future. And I think that report certainly is a huge first step on that path. But it, as Laura said, the report itself is not the end. The end is the outcomes to make sure we do the things that it recommends in there. And we've made huge strides in that direction already. Hello. Hello.
Do you think this report will give confidence back to the community that the West Mercia Force serves? Because obviously, at the time, people couldn't actually understand the turn of events and what had actually happened, that you'd had contact with Reynolds and failed so miserably. So do you think this will give confidence to the community? And if not, what could you do to restore that confidence?
Yeah, I when I'm in situations like this, I try and put myself in this position, not as the chief first and foremost, but as a member of the public and as a dad. And I think it would have, my confidence would have taken the blow. Without doubt, it would be, I think it'd be ridiculous of me to say otherwise, because we're charged with looking after the public, we're charged with looking after vulnerable people, and the report clearly says that we didn't do that on this occasion. Do I think the report itself restores confidence? Actually, no, I don't think the report does. I think it's what we have done subsequently and what we will try and do in the future. And I think the other thing that hopefully will build confidence and restore confidence is that, albeit we're here today because things went wrong. Well, we're here today because Reynolds killed Georgia, but we're here today because some things went wrong before that. But overwhelmingly, the public's contact with West Mercia Police and how we deal with things and how we look after people is a good one and a good experience. Not always perfect, but by and large, overwhelmingly good. And I believe fervently that that's the public's perception of West Mercia. So I'm not in any sense underplaying the huge significance of this event and the impact it's had on the communities that we serve. But I hope, and it's my fervent wish that, and I know that we do everything we can to make sure our dealings and our professionalism every day is what encourages people to have confidence in us. Hello.
Lizzie Higgins, BBC News. Having promised Georgia's parents that you were going to be open and accountable, are you going to make public the findings of the Devon and Cornwall Forces review?
Actually, Karen is at the back. Karen, have we done that yet? Do you know what the plan is? No, it's internal report, is it? Well, it's still subject of misconduct proceedings, which is why we can't at the moment. So officers are facing misconduct proceedings. I'll have to think through about it's not our report, but I don't believe we're in a position to release that. But Stephen and Lynette have seen it.
I was under the impression that they said that it was up to you as to whether you chose to make it public.
I don't believe it's within our remit to make it public.
So are you saying that you will or won't?
I will go away and find out, but I don't believe it's within our remit.
It should be released because it gives all the answers to the questions that remain in here.
And we were
This is an outline and a suggestion of what went wrong. The Devon and Cornwall confirmed what went wrong. And in our opinion, when you read this, we cried when we read this. And we cried even more when we read the Devon and Cornwall and the context of it and the answers to why officers didn't do what they should have. In our eyes, it's 10 times worse than Devon and Cornwall's. And it would be an embarrassment to the police. Like, this isn't an embarrassment to the police. But I think it should come out because it gives you the answers. And this is only half the story. It's like reading a novel and closing it halfway through, not knowing the end.
Hello.
Hello, Elizabeth Lincoln with the BBC. I guess some of this relates to the Devon and Cornwall report. Firstly to you, Steve and Lynette. My understanding is that there are misconduct meetings due to take place in November, but that formal disciplinary action, i.e. someone losing their job, can't result from those meetings. Are you satisfied, or do you think you will be satisfied, that individuals who made mistakes will be held to account for those mistakes?
I'll take that one, because actually I've looked into how the HR process works within the police a little bit more, and to me now the understanding is it's very difficult to sack or dismiss a policeman if they do a bad job, and to me there are a couple in that report that did an exceptionally bad job, and if they were in any other profession they would have been dismissed, and they should be ashamed. But I will go with what the process is within the police force at the moment, and if misconduct is the best that I can get for that, then that's what I'll go with.
And Chief Constable, your response to that?
Yeah.
So clearly members of your force who George's parents
Yeah.
feel failed them and have not been held accountable.
Well, I think this goes right to the heart why I sought independent investigation from the outset. So refer to the IPCC that have nothing. They're independent. We got an independent force because the IPCC wanted me to investigate my own force. Devon and Cornwall came back and said they didn't believe any officers should face misconduct proceedings that could result in their dismissal. And some of those findings were appealed by Stephen and Lynette, and that went back to the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and with one exception, which actually raised the level of misconduct for one officer. They came back and said no, 4 officers should face misconduct meetings, which does not, you're absolutely right, does not include the power to dismiss. That's the way the law is written, and I take the fact that 2 independent organisations, one of which the IPCC has also concurred that that's the potential sanction those officers can face, I believe that's the appropriate one.
And you're comfortable having those people within your force?
Well, first and foremost, those misconduct proceedings have not been held yet. I've not investigated it. An outside force has, and it's been reviewed by the IPCC, and their judgment is that their future employment or status as police officers should not be in doubt. So I will go with that, yes.
Despite massive failings by them in their line of duty.
Well, you're applying that term massive failings. I've said right at the outside that we could have and should have got things better. They've been investigated just about as thoroughly as they could have been and independently assessed, and that's the judgment.
Can I just say that I've got the IPCC report that came back to us, and actually the only reason that they weren't given a gross misconduct was that they did their job, but they did the minimum in that job.
What the IPCC report says is they have to give these officers credit for doing certain things. So they give them credit for going out and arresting Reynolds. They give them credit for interviewing him once. That's what they're expected to do. They should be giving credit when somebody's sorted out an ABE interview for the victim, made sure they're safe all night, and so on and so on. So what the problem is, and I understand where the gaffer's coming from, because it's rules and regulations, and he's got to stick to them, and we all have, but there's grey areas. Lynette is the one who took the gauntlet up on that one, and she discovered that the whole discipline process with regarding deciding where misconduct goes up to gross misconduct, it's a very grey area. It's subjective, and there's no defined line where you can say, well, that's definitely this and that's definitely that. It goes through a process, and then somebody makes their decision, and like the gaffer said, they've made their decision, and we'll have to live with that.
Hello. Anybody else? Hello.
Hey, Jennifer from BBC. I understand one of the officers who has a misconduct meeting has actually been promoted while that misconduct meeting has been around. Do you feel that's appropriate?
That's a very good question. You're absolutely right. They have been. We have to review our procedures and see how that came around. Had we been in possession of all the information at the time, we may have made a different decision. The officer in the case thoroughly deserved a promotion based on his overall performance, but clearly that's a factor we need to consider.
Will that be considered in retrospect?
No, because the power to reduce in rank is not available to the misconduct meeting.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I sense the questions are drying up. Shall we move on to the one-to-ones? Is everyone okay with that?